going to attempt to read this with little commentary. I'm going to save commentary for another video. But I can't promise you that I'm not going to stop and exclaim because this is a passionate subject for me. So this article is from The Economist, The Economics of Thinness. It is economically rational for ambitious women to try as hard as possible to be thin. I wholeheartedly agree, not because of my personal beliefs, but just because it's real. That's the where the world is, and I'm not rallying the charge against it. That I'm just trying to get in where I fit in on the thin side, and I have a long way to go. So pretend that I read whatever disclaimer that YouTubers read when they're reading something that's not theirs. I don't own this article or the rights to it or nothing of it. It's public information that anybody can look up and read if they want to. So let's start here. Forgive me as I butcher a lot of these names and places that are not standard English language. So I'm going to call this lady Muriel Giuliano. I don't know if that's correct, but Muriel Giuliano is a slim and successful woman. She was born in France and studied in Paris before working as an interpreter for the United Nations. She then worked in the champagne business and in 1984 joined Veuve Clicquot, whose performance was at the time rather flat. She fizzed up the ranks and launched their American subsidiary. In 1991, she became its chief executive and ran it with great success. In her apartment overlooking downtown Manhattan, she offers a glass of water before quipping, "You know how much I love water." She is correct. Drinking plenty of water is a key rule in French Women Don't Get Fat, her best-selling book on how to lose weight and stay slim the French way. In the book, she describes discomfort when, as a teenager, she gained weight while spending a summer in America. Her uneasiness comes to a head when she returns home to France and her father, instead of rushing to hug her, tells her she looks like a sack of potatoes. She goes on a new diet plan, remembers her old French habits, lots of water, controlled portions, moving regularly, and tips the scales back in her favor. As a successful woman who was willing to talk publicly about her appearance and her weight, Miss Giuliano was rare. Of course, no one wants to talk about it, she says. It is much easier to pretend it comes naturally. Successive waves of feminism have told smart women they should have emaciated themselves from vanity, as they have from domestic servitude and an existence defined by procreation. But as a greatly affected by a comment about her weight, she is not rare. Aubrey Gordon, the co-host of The Maintenance, a podcast which unpicks the problems with modern weight loss and wellness, was told by a doctor that she was overweight, aged just 10. Roxane Gay, an American writer, describes the shock on her parents' faces when she returned home from her first term at boarding school, age 13, weighing 30 pounds more than she did when she went away. Differences are deeply personal, but also universal, at least in the rich world. I'm middle class, and it's universal for me too. They reflect the pressure on women to look like an ideal. That ideal has changed over time. Renaissance nudes boast ample curves, but in more recent decades, it has been defined by thinness. In the 1980s in New York, it was the social X-ray, a term coined by Tom Wolfe in his novel Bonfire of the Vanities, to describe women so slight they existed only in two dimensions. I need to reread that. This morphed into the heroin chic ideal of London in the 1990s. Today, the perfect body is the weasel bod, says one Los Angelina who is surrounded by women seeking physical perfection. These women strive to look streamlined and sleek, like a weasel, as though they could slip through water without disturbing it. Pursuit of such a body might permit a little more food than the regimes of the past, but it is just as difficult to attain. All women recognize the importance placed upon their bodies. It is as though girls are walking through a forest unaware and are then shown the trees. They can wonder how the trees got there, how long they have been growing, and how deep their roots really go. But there is little they can do about them, and it is almost impossible to imagine the world any other way. And the fiction that clever and ambitious women who can measure their worth in the labor market on the basis of their intelligence or education need pay no attention to their figure is difficult to maintain upon examination of the evidence on how their weight interacts with their wages or income. The relationship differs in poor countries where rich people are generally heavier than poor. Weight and income. That is the crux of my problems right now. I know my weight has played a part of my career success. I know it has. I don't have any tangible evidence of which, but I see the difference in me and my brain power versus people with the look and the quote unquote confidence and how far they get. There's a stark difference. But anyway, wealthy people are thinner than poor ones in countries such as America, Britain, Germany, and rich Asian countries such as South Korea. There's typically a gently downward sloping relationship between most measures of weight, like body mass index, a measure of obesity, or the share of a population that is obese, and income, as measured by wages, the share of people below poverty line and their income quartile. That poor people are more likely to be overweight has often been explained by arguments that obesity in the rich world is a feature of poverty. Poor people may struggle to afford healthy foods. They may reach for processed or fast foods because they lack the time to prepare meals at home, or have less time to exercise because low-wage jobs often involve working long shifts and can be less flexible than those performed by the laptop class. Or because low income is often a function of limited education, perhaps so goes the thinking that lack of education extends to a lack of knowledge about how to maintain a healthy weight. The problem with all these explanations is that the correlation between income and weight at the population level in advanced countries is driven almost entirely by women. In America and Italy, the relationship between income and weight or obesity is flat for men and downward sloping for women. In South Korea, the correlation is positive for men, but is more often is more than in South Korea, the correlation is positive for men, but this is more than offset by the sharply negative correlation in women. Sorry, y'all. In France, the relationship slopes gently downwards for men, but the slope is much steeper for women. These kinds of patterns seem to hold across most rich countries and appear robust to various ways height or obesity might be measured. The Duchess's decree. In other words, rich women are much thinner than poor women, but rich men are about as fat as poor men. Wallace Simpson, whose marriage to King Edward VIII prompted his abdication, is supposed to have said that a woman can never be too rich or too thin. Apparently, she must be neither. So apparently, he's talking about Maris, if y'all are Frasier fans. Maris the heiress. That should give pause to anyone who thinks that poverty can explain why people are overweight or obese, or that being rich helps people to maintain a lower weight. You must then explain why those dynamics seem only to affect women. Perhaps the relationship would look the same for both sexes, but the occupations they do that require or might result in slimness differ. Men disproportionately do lower paid physically active jobs like construction, although nurses spend as much time walking or standing as builders and are disproportionately women. Some rich women, such as actresses, might be explicitly required to be thin to play. Still, it is hard to believe that either dynamic explains the entire difference. Data from the American Bureau of Labor Statistics suggests that 3.5% of civilian workers do intensely physical jobs, and some of those categories, like exercise instruction and dancing, employ plenty of women. Only 0.1% of workers do jobs such as acting. That there is a gender gap in the relationship between income and height, which cannot easily be explained by other differences between men and women, indicates another explanation. Perhaps being thin helps women become rich. Oh, yeah. Myriad studies find that overweight or obese women are paid less than their thinner peers. While there is little difference in wages between obese men and men in the medically defined normal range, there are exceptions. One Swedish study found that obese men were paid less, but obese women were not. But research in America, Britain, Canada, and Denmark suggests that overweight women do have lower salaries. The penalty for an obese woman is significant, costing her about 10% of her income. The stigma against overweight people has grown with this might understate reality because it is hard to measure the wage gap for someone who was not offered employment because of their size. Estimates of the wage premium for women being thin are so significant that she might find it almost as valuable to lose weight as she would to gain additional education. Here we are again. This article is talking about me. The wage premium for getting a master's degree is around 18%, only 1.8 times the premium a fat woman could, in theory, earn by losing around 65 pounds. I'm going to stop right there. The reason I got the master's degree is because I kept getting passed over for promotions. And since I've got the master's degree, I haven't moved career-wise. And Honestly, I think a lot of it has to do with my weight, as to not being the poster child for the company that I work for. Yes, I am very pretty. I'm the exception in most of the spheres as far as being overweight, but I know my weight plays a factor in my career success. So back to the article. Roughly the amount, oh, let me start the sentence over again. The wage premium for getting a master's degree is around 18%, only 1.8 times the premium a fat woman could, in theory, earn by losing around 65 pounds. Roughly the amount that a moderately obese woman of average height could have to lose to be in the medically defined normal range. I feel like that should be woman. The penalty appears to be particularly significant for white women. Evidence for Black and Hispanic women is weaker, though could be explained in part the fact that studies often use BMI, which can misclassify these women. Discrimination against fat women has not diminished as their numbers have risen. We might expect a declining penalty due to the increase in the percentage of overweight individuals, wrote David Lempert, an economist, in a working paper for the BLS, because it has become more normal to be overweight. Instead, the stigma against overweight has grown with their number. It almost doubled between 1980 and 2000. He suggests this may be because the increasing rarity of thinness has led to its rising premium. That is a good quote. I need to highlight this article. The conclusion of the paper layers one infuriating sentence on top of another. As larger women age, he writes, they incur the effects of years of cumulative wage discrimination. Boom. Controlling for other factors, their starting wages are lower. Boom. Throughout their working careers, these women receive fewer raises. Boom. And promotions. Boom. His paper shows that an obese 43-year-old woman received a larger wage penalty in 2004 than she received at 20 in 1981. And also that an obese 20-year-old woman receives a larger wage penalty today than she would have in 1981 at age 20. Might reflect in part the higher cost that obese employees might impose on their employers, especially in America. Health insurance premiums in America are often paid by employers, and very overweight or obese people tend to incur higher costs, partly because they suffer more health problems as they age. Now, I'm not arguing that that's true. I mean, there are obesity-related illnesses. Yes, that is the fact, but it's also still, it is unclear why these costs would be passed on to only to women. And studies in Canada and Europe, where government-funded healthcare is the norm, find similar-sized wage penalties for women. In my company alone, we have had a few people who have drained, and when I say drained, our insurance premiums, and they were not overweight. They had cancer and other illnesses, but they were not heavy people, but they were sick. Anyway, meanwhile, the idea that the penalty for being obese might be rising is backed up by the data from the implicit bias test runs by Harvard University. It asks test takers to associate people of different races, sex, sexual orientation, or weight with words like good or bad. And in general, the findings are trending in a positive direction. Excuse me, discrimination on the basis of race and sex has fallen over the last decade. Negative associations of gay people have fallen by a third. Weight is the exception. Attitudes towards heavy individuals have become substantially more negative. In this context, the arguments often made for why women and girls feel such pressure to be thin and suffer from low self-esteem when they are not appear to be woefully incomplete. Perhaps women do feel bad about themselves because they compare themselves to the gazelles that populate the covers of magazines and are duped into thinking those photos are unedited and attainable. Maybe their parents or a doctor commented on their weight when they were young. But in addition to those pressures, it is the powerful incentive of the market. Women accurately perceive that failing to lose weight or to be thin will literally cost them. Yes, failing to lose weight or to be thin will cost you. Is it fair? No. Is it real? Yes. It is economically rational for everyone to devote time to education because it has clear returns in the labor market and for future wages. In the same way, it appears to be economically rational for women to pursue being thin. Obsessing over what and how much to eat and paying for fancy exercise classes are investments that will bear returns. For men, they are not. So Orange Theory is worth it, according to this article. To some extent, women know this. A generation ago, they seemed to take it for granted. The most basic thing to get on with after your job or during it is how you look and feel. It is unthinkable that a woman bent on having it all would want to be fat or even plump. True. Wrote Helen Gurley Brown, the editor of Cosmopolitan magazine in the 1980s and 1990s, in her book Having It All. Before rattling off advice about how to survive on 800 calories a day, encouraging women to weigh themselves daily and to accept that dieting is hell and stop getting depressed about it. Such attitudes were more acceptable 4 decades ago. Oh my God, 1980 was 4 decades ago. I understand I'm 40 years old, but it's still alarming to see that. But the economic reality does not seem to have shifted much. All that has changed is the narrative, which has embraced body positivity and shunned dieting. Instead of the South Beach diet or Atkins, women eliminate foods, becoming gluten-free, vegan, low sugar, under the guise of health or wellness to improve their gut health or raise their energy levels. People spend large sums to attend soul cycle classes, a kind of boutique indoor cycling, to be strong and fit, not to burn calories. Even glossy women's magazines now model skepticism towards top-down narratives about how we should look. But the psychological parasite of the ideal woman has evolved to survive in an ecosystem that pretends to resist her. That's a mouthful, writes Gia Toliento in her book Trick Mirror. Feminism has not eradicated the tyranny of the ideal woman, but rather has entrenched it and made it trickier. That's facts. That's facts right there. Y'all already know I'm not ashamed to say that I'm on this weight loss journey because I want to be perceived a certain way. I want a certain lifestyle, and health is the actual bottom criteria of why I'm trying to get fit. It's important, yes, because I do want a long-term good quality of life, but lifestyle is what I'm more concerned with, and that is associated with thinness. So the perception of the total is misguided. Because being very obese comes with elevated health risks, some might argue it is not a problem that there are incentives for women to lose weight. But this relies on two wobbly pillars of logic. First, that people's weight really is within their control. And second, that shame is an effective motivator. Most people have experienced the effect that eating a little less and moving a little more has on their physical form. And so it is common to think that weight and obesity is a mutable trait, one that slim people work to achieve and fat people fail to achieve. If this were the case, then it might seem possible for women to opt out of discrimination on the basis of weight by conforming to the body type society demands of them. Yet, the perception of total control is misguided. People often report gaining weight when they start taking antidepressants. Women tend to, if they suffer from conditions such as polycystic ovarian syndrome. Miss Gay describes how her weight gain occurred in the aftermath of a brutal sexual assault. It also raises the question of why a great slice of humanity collectively lost control of their eating habits in the 1980s, when obesity rates began to soar in developed countries. Scientists are unsure of the answer. Some point to the rise of processed foods, but they do agree that it is almost impossible to lose weight and stay smaller. And people who achieve this are far rarer than those who spend their lives trying, failing, and blaming themselves. Perhaps shame can be on the margin. It worked for Miss Giuliano when asked why her reaction to her father's comments was to decide to lose weight rather than tell him off. She paused for a moment. But of course, she says, he was right. Too high a price. But think too of the huge cost that the stigma, shame, or the fear of becoming overweight has on all the women and girls who spend their lives worrying about what becoming that way might cost them. It is impossible to move around the world as a woman and not notice the time, energy, and investment in logging the food they eat, reading diet books, and attending exercise classes. Anyone who has tried a juice cleanse or a cabbage soup diet will know that the pursuit of thinness can come at the expense of other important things girls and women might want to do, like being able to focus on exams and work or enjoy food. According to some surveys, girls as young as 6 recognize the expectation that they should be thin. Then adolescents, overwhelmed by sudden expectations of beauty, transmit anorexia and bulimia to one another like a virus, writes Ms. Toliento. The tragedy is that there is no escape. Most women seem to try to conform. Some choose not to. Many simply fail. But whatever path is taken, it seems to come at a great cost. Ooh, this is deep. Is there any more? Nope, that's the end. Tell me what y'all think. Nika and I are supposed to talk about this article um, on a live stream we're going to do together on Wednesday. But drop down in the comments and let me know how you feel about the economics of thinness. Has it affected you? Um, yeah. Do you think it's fair? Do you think it's not fair? Are there any solutions other than conforming? Like, what do you think? Talk to me, folks. Talk to me. My method is conforming. I'm trying. I don't know if I'll achieve it, but I'm trying. I've been yo-yoing for a very long time. But I'm trying. I want to be thin and pretty and make money and be perceived as beautiful and have the doors literally open for me. That's what I want. Drop down in the comments.